Rome, 39 CE. An imperial banquet. Picture me sitting at a long table beside my wife. All around us, hundreds of senators recline on their couches. Music drifts softly through the room. Wine keeps flowing into silver cups. Everything feels controlled, elegant, safe, until it isn't. The emperor suddenly rises. He looks straight at my wife. Smiles. Then, casually, like he's choosing a dish from the table, he gives an order. She comes with me. Guards move instantly. They seize her, dragging her away as she screams my name. I don't stand. I don't speak. I don't even let my face change. Because I know the rule: if I move, if I protest, if I show even the slightest defiance, I die on the spot. She vanishes behind a curtain. For the next half hour, I sit frozen, forced to listen. Moans. Screams. Mocking laughter echoing from the other side of the wall. Every sound cuts deeper because I can't escape it, and I can't stop it. When she finally returns, broken and shaking, the emperor calmly takes his seat across from me. He adjusts his tunic. Then, in a steady voice, he begins describing, detail by detail, what he just did to my wife. He does it publicly. In front of the entire Senate. In front of me. No one speaks. The other senators stare down at their cups, because they all understand the truth. Next time, it could be their wife. This isn't a story. It isn't exaggeration. This happened repeatedly during the reign of Caligula. And the public rape of senators' wives was only one part of his ritualized cruelty. He wasn't simply a harsh ruler. He was something far worse, a man who turned absolute power into a formal ceremony of humiliation. He transformed the imperial palace into a stage where degradation, fear, and violence were performed as entertainment. He proclaimed himself a living god and demanded worship from all of Rome. And he devised punishment so obscene that even Roman historians recoiled from recording their full details. Today, I'm taking you through 7 of Caligula's most perverted rituals, the practices Rome tried to erase, the secrets so dark that most history books barely acknowledge they existed. By the end, you'll understand why his name became a synonym for absolute evil. Because what he did wasn't insanity. It was intentional. It was calculated perversion. So why do history books talk about Caligula's reign, his politics, his conflicts, but stay silent about his perversions? Because the truth is uncomfortable. Because real power has always been far more grotesque than we're taught. Here on Dark History, we uncover the stories the world prefers to bury. If you want the unfiltered past, stay with me, because what comes next is even darker. To understand Caligula's depravity, you first have to understand the scale of his power. Rome, 37 CE. The largest empire on earth. 60 million people under its control. And at its center stood Caligula, unchecked, unrestrained, absolute. He was only 24 years old. No limits. No accountability. Complete authority over life and death. He had watched his predecessor, Tiberius, rule through terror from an isolated island palace. He had seen his uncle Claudius ridiculed for his limp and stammer. And from all of this, he learned one essential lesson. In Rome, humiliation was worse than death. Roman society was built on honor. Your dignitas, your reputation, your family name mattered more than survival itself. Lose your honor, and you were already dead. Caligula understood this better than any emperor before him. So he designed a system with only 2 choices: endure humiliation in silence or die. Protest meant execution. Silence meant disgrace. There was no escape. And his most powerful weapon wasn't the legions. It was Rome's own honor system, turned inside out. According to Suetonius, who had access to imperial records, Caligula staged these humiliation banquets at least 40 times in 4 years. Nearly one every month. Historians estimate that over 200 senatorial families were destroyed through this system of intimate blackmail. These weren't random cruelties. They were organized. Strategic. designed not just to punish individuals, but to shatter Rome's entire ruling class. Think about the trap he built. Every senator who witnessed another man's humiliation became guilty. If he reported it, he admitted he watched and did nothing. If he stayed silent, he was complicit. Either way, Caligula owned him. Rome's most powerful men became prisoners of their own shame. And this was only the beginning. Stop for a moment and think about it. How many stories like this vanished completely because the system succeeded in burying them? What you've just heard barely survives in the historical record at all. And that should tell you something about how effective Caligula truly was. Now imagine everything they did manage to erase. Because what comes next is even worse. The mechanism itself was brutally simple. Caligula would summon 50, sometimes 70 senators to one of his banquets. Attendance wasn't optional. Declining the invitation was treated as treason, and treason meant death. Once dinner was underway, he would casually select a wife from the room. Guards would seize her and drag her behind a private curtain while the rest of us remained seated. Nothing was soundproof. The curtain was thin by design. For the next half hour, every man at that table was forced to listen. When Caligula returned, he didn't pretend nothing had happened. He described it, slowly, vividly, right there in front of the woman's husband, in front of everyone. But that still wasn't the worst part. Sometimes he turned it into a competition. He would loudly compare wives to one another, rating them, announcing which senator's wife pleased him most. What he created wasn't just humiliation, it was ranking. He reduced elite Roman women to trophies and forced their husbands to measure themselves against one another through shared disgrace. The psychological trap was flawless. Because now silence wasn't just survival. It was participation. According to records later preserved in the Vatican archives, one of these women had a name, Ennia Thrasilla. She was the wife of Senator Marcus Silanus. 26 years old. 2 children. Her family lineage stretched back for generations. One night, in August of 39 CE, Caligula pointed at her. What followed was witnessed by Seneca, who recorded the night in his memoirs. He wrote that the emperor took her as one takes spoils of war. When Caligula returned, Seneca said he described her body in language that would have embarrassed a brothel. Marcus Silanus never reacted. His face remained still. But Seneca noticed his hands beneath the table, his knuckles white, gripping his knife so tightly it looked as if he might drive it straight through his own palm. Marcus Silanus never spoke in the Senate again. 3 months later, he was dead. Officially, the records called it natural causes. Seneca wrote the truth, Marcus ended his own life because the emperor had already stripped him of his honor. This was never about physical acts. It was about dominance. About demonstrating that no institution, no marriage, no lineage, no bond could survive the emperor's will. And for Caligula, even that wasn't enough. He wanted something more perverse still, the public destruction of innocence. According to Cassius Dio, a Greek historian with access to Senate records, Caligula organized at least 12 public auctions of virgin daughters from noble families. The process was chillingly organized. Families that offended him were selected. Sometimes the offense was real, a vote against him, resistance to funding one of his projects. Sometimes it existed only in his imagination. It didn't matter. Their daughters, usually between 14 and 17, were summoned to the palace under the excuse of imperial service. Refusal meant death. These girls were then presented at evening gatherings attended by Rome's elite, wealthy merchants, foreign diplomats, and, most grotesquely, other senators. Sometimes their own relatives were present in the room. Caligula himself ran the auctions. The opening bid was typically 1,000 denarii, roughly a Roman soldier's yearly pay. But the highest bidder wasn't buying freedom. He was buying the right to publicly take the girl's virginity in front of the audience while Caligula watched and laughed. One documented case names a 15-year-old girl called Drusilla Minor, unrelated to Caligula's sister of the same name. She was the daughter of Senator Aulus Silanus. Administrative tablets discovered in Pompeii, now held at the Naples National Archaeological Museum, record that her auction took place on March 18, 40 CE. She was sold to a Syrian merchant for 3,400 denarii. The tablets don't describe what followed. They only note that she was returned to her family 3 days later. The wording tells you everything. Her father never spoke her name again. She was sent to a remote villa and disappears entirely from the historical record. The shame was considered irreversible. Some families tried to protect their daughters by marrying them off quickly, hoping that marriage would make them untouchable. Caligula responded by nullifying those marriages with imperial decrees and taking the girls anyway. This wasn't indulgence. It wasn't impulse. It was the systematic dismantling of Rome's ruling class through acts of domination. So stop for a moment and ask yourself, was Caligula insane, or was he a calculating tyrant who understood exactly how to weaponize humiliation? Sit with that question, because what comes next may change your answer entirely. His obsession with spectacle spilled into the arena, but not in the way most people imagine. According to Suetonius, Caligula sometimes forced senators to fight as gladiators, not against professionals, but against each other or against animals. That alone was degrading. But the true cruelty lay in who he forced to watch. The front rows were reserved for the senators' wives and daughters. Attendance was mandatory. They were required to watch their husbands, fathers, and brothers fight for their lives. And if a woman turned away, if she closed her eyes, flinched, or showed distress, she was dragged into the arena as well. One account tells of a senator named Quintus Pomponius. He was forced to fight a starved leopard armed with nothing but a wooden club. His wife, Julia, was seated directly across from him. She was 8 months pregnant. Pomponius survived 11 minutes before the leopard tore out his throat. That same night, Julia went into premature labor. Both she and the child died. Caligula did not attend their funerals, but he seized their property the following day. When Caligula later declared himself a god, not symbolically, but literally, he didn't stop at demanding worship. He set out to corrupt the idea of worship itself. He built a temple to himself on the Palatine Hill. Inside stood a golden statue of Caligula as Jupiter. And he ordered senators' wives to serve as priestesses there. What that meant is recorded in fragmentary accounts by Philo of Alexandria, who visited Rome in 40 CE. These women were required to perform so-called sacred rites with male worshippers, ritualized acts of domination carried out inside a temple dedicated to Caligula himself. Wealthy Romans eager to win favor donated lavishly to the temple. And Rome watched as devotion, humiliation, and violence collapsed into a single ritual, designed not to honor a god, but to remind everyone who truly owned their bodies, their families, and their souls. In return for their generosity, donors were rewarded with access to the temple's so-called priestesses, women who, only months earlier, had been counted among Rome's most respected matrons. That was the elegance of Caligula's trap. He always had deniability. He wasn't, on paper, forcing anyone into prostitution. Officially, these women were fulfilling sacred obligations to a divine ruler inside a consecrated temple. It was framed as worship. Duty. And anyone who refused could be charged with sacrilege, a crime that didn't end with fines or banishment, but with death. Caligula loved games. But his games were never about skill or victory. They existed for one purpose: humiliation. One of his favorites, mentioned by multiple ancient sources, became infamous as the crawling game. He would host extravagant dinners, hundreds of guests, endless wine, food fit for gods. Then, halfway through the night, he would clap his hands. The doors slammed shut. Guards sealed the exits. And the rules were announced. Every senator had to drop to his hands and knees and crawl toward the emperor like an animal. The last one to reach him would be executed on the spot. Try to imagine the scene. Men in their 60s and 70s, former consuls, decorated war heroes, grandfathers, scrambling across polished marble floors. Climbing over one another. Ripping expensive togas. Slipping in spilled wine. Desperation everywhere, while Caligula lounged above them, laughing, popping grapes into his mouth. One account from 38 CE describes Senator Lucius Vitellius, a man who had once commanded legions in Germania. In his panic, he tore his toga while shoving past younger men. His knees split open on the stone. Blood smeared the floor. His dignity dissolved in front of men who had once saluted him. When he finally reached the emperor's throne, shaking and gasping for breath, Caligula didn't dismiss him. He made him kneel. Forced him to wait there while he finished his wine. Then Caligula smiled and pointed at his sandals. That was the prize. Vitellius bent down and licked the emperor's feet. He did it because the alternative was death, and because he had grandchildren he still hoped to see grow up. Some sources suggest Caligula sometimes twisted the game further. Instead of senators, he forced their wives to compete. The reward wasn't survival. It was their husband's life. The choice was brutally simple: crawl like an animal, or watch your husband die. Yet the most psychologically devastating ritual wasn't theatrical at all. It was quiet. It was known as the midnight summons. Guards would arrive at a senator's home in the dead of night. No explanation. Just one sentence: the emperor summons you. The senator would have minutes to dress and follow. Sometimes Caligula greeted him with a banquet. The senator was forced to eat, drink, laugh, and toast the emperor's health, smiling while his heart raced, wondering if this meal would be his last. Other times, Caligula waited in his bedchamber with the senator's wife. The husband was forced to watch. Guards stood behind him to ensure he didn't turn away. Sometimes it lasted minutes. Sometimes hours. And sometimes, most terrifying of all, Caligula did nothing. He would sit in silence, staring at the senator for hours. Then he would smile and say, "You may go." No charges. No accusations. Just the message, "I can summon you whenever I want. Your life belongs to me." According to Philo of Alexandria, one senator was summoned 7 times in a single month. By the end, the man stopped sleeping. He sat fully dressed by his door each night, waiting for the knock. When it didn't come, he couldn't rest. When it did, he wished he'd never been born. The psychological toll was devastating. Senators lived in constant fear. They couldn't relax. They couldn't sleep. Every sound outside their homes might be guards. Many developed what we'd now recognize as paranoia, insomnia, and trauma. Some broke completely. That was the point. Caligula didn't need to kill them. He only needed them shattered. And his most perverted ritual wasn't any single act. It was the system itself. He made everyone complicit. If you witnessed a senator's wife being violated and said nothing, you were guilty. If you attended the auctions and refused to bid, you insulted the emperor. If you rejected the temple rites, you committed sacrilege. Every ritual was designed to implicate you, to make you part of the corruption, so that even if Caligula died, speaking out would mean condemning yourself. He turned Rome's entire elite into accomplices in their own degradation. And that, more than any single cruelty, was his true masterpiece. For decades, historians dismissed these accounts as exaggerations, Roman propaganda meant to demonize a hated ruler. Then, in 1987, archaeologists excavating beneath the Palatine Hill uncovered something chilling. A hidden chamber. Marble walls. And carved into the stone, 23 women's names. Beside each name was a date and a Latin phrase, sententia mortis, silence is death. They were the wives of senators Caligula had publicly violated. Their own hands had carved those names in secret, as if they hoped someone, someday, would remember what had been done to them. The lead archaeologist, Marco Bellini, later said, "This discovery confirms that the ancient sources were not exaggerated. If anything, they were too gentle." 2,000 years later, their names resurfaced. Not because Rome wanted to remember them, but because they refused to be erased. And now, so do I. So why does this story matter? Because Caligula teaches something terrifying: absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it perverts. It turns suffering into entertainment, humiliation into policy, and silence into survival. And worst of all, it makes all of this feel normal. Seneca, who lived under Caligula, wrote that a tyrant doesn't need to kill everyone, only to make everyone fear being next. He was right. What's most chilling is that this system of silence through shame didn't die with Rome. It still exists wherever people stay quiet because speaking out would mean social destruction, wherever shame shields the powerful. Caligula ruled for only 4 years. In that short time, he destroyed more than 200 families, humiliated Rome's most powerful men, and turned the imperial palace into a theater of blood and perversion. When he was assassinated in January of 41 CE, Rome breathed in relief. But the damage was already done. Because he had proven something terrifying, that unlimited power can turn even the most honorable people into silent accomplices in their own humiliation. This is the story history books rarely tell, the true perversion of absolute power. This is dark history. And Caligula wasn't the only Roman emperor who turned private acts into instruments of power. Another would take that logic even further, this time within his own family. If you want this story to be the next one I dive into, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, too. I'm always curious which corner of the world this story managed to reach.